Hey everybody, welcome to the third session in the five-part webinar series that I've put together about investment real estate. My name is Stacy Sanseverino, and our guest speaker tonight is Jared Gruber of JG Real Estate. Do you want to say hello? Quick wave hello, Jared.
Hey guys, hope all is well. Like Stacy said, I'm from JG Real Estate and looking forward to chatting a little bit tonight.
All right, awesome. It's 7 o'clock and we had an appointment at 7, and I'm a stickler for let's getting started on time to reward those who arrived on time so we can end on time. So like I said, today is the third session, and we're just going to go over quickly the agenda, which is I'm going to summarize sessions 1 and 2. That way, if you missed any of them, you can go back to my YouTube channel of stacylovesrealestate.com and look for the Tuesday night series that is the hour long, where we're going to dive deeper into our topics. And then the Wednesday series is a half an hour, and the guest speaker may or may not be on it. And if they're not on it, I will summarize their main points. And then after I give you my insight into my 18 years being a landlord in Philadelphia and the past 4 years of being a client of JG Real Estate Property Management, I'll give you my insights as to working with them. And then Jared will talk about, from his perspective, what his company does to help his clients take care of their properties, maintain them, get them leased, and fully, operational and making the most money they can for them. Then I will review with you an opportunity to use the spare bedroom in your house to help people visiting Philly for medical reasons, using this charity called Host for Hospitals. Go over the series schedule, an open forum for any questions about anything, any real estate related topic. Doesn't have to be what we're talking about tonight. And I encourage you to ask questions during the presentation, because it's really meant to be a dialogue and a conversation. So if you have any questions, raise your hand and I will look over to our little chat box over here every once in a while to make sure I'm getting your questions. And then lastly, the handouts are uploaded to the webinar so that you can download them. So Jared has his handouts up there, and then I have 2 versions of the PowerPoint slides up there. One is a slide per page, and the other is 3 pages or 3 slides per page with lines for notes. So you can download those and have them. All right, so let's see. Our next slide. All right, so in session 1, we discussed why we're saving. So it's really important to know what your time frame is. I'm pretty passionate about helping my clients split their equity. Basically, if they're parents of young kids, getting a second property using the equity in their own property, and that way in 15 years, they can take out a boatload of cash and pay for their kids' college and not have to go into debt for it, and their tenant will pay that debt back for them. I also talked about my personal experience being a landlord and picking properties to a smaller degree than we're going to do tonight. In that first session, we also talked about why real estate, like real estate versus stocks. So the biggest reason is leverage. You're controlling an asset that's worth 4 or 5 times the value of the money you're investing, and it's a tangible asset. And there's tax benefits. Your tenant is building up your equity. There's appreciation, ideally, and cash flow. And you don't have to sell the asset in order to use the equity in the asset. And you can have your tenant pay it back for you, which is awesome. And then our first guest was Chris Coyne, talking about insurance and how to mitigate risk with various types of insurance. In session 2, we discussed, my hands are too fast. Session 2, we discussed 3 strategies to build your portfolio. So we've had renters on the call in the past. And so the first step is getting your own personal property. The second step, once you've been in your property for 5 or more years and the equity's built up, leveraging that property to buy yourself a new investment property. Or if you're ready for a new home for yourself, converting that original home into an investment property and then buying your new primary. And then we talked the 6 easy steps in terms of building wealth, which were to, number 1, determine your purchasing power. Number 2, identify areas and properties that fit your budget. Obviously, visit and analyze those properties, and then make the offer. Go through your inspection and other contingencies. And then if you got to rent out one of the properties. So that's the final piece of that. And on that second call, Mike Leotone of Center City Mortgage and Investments went over a variety of scenarios. Plus, we talked about HELOCs, which is a way to leverage your current property to get cash out for the next purchase. So Mike gave us a bunch of different options, whether you are a first-time buyer or already own a home, or if you're needing alternative financing options that are just dependent on the asset itself rather than your income, which is a really cool product, and also renovation loans for owners and also for investors, plus hard money loans. So that's session 2. So I encourage you, if you missed either one of those, go visit the Tuesday or Wednesday night or Tuesday night, Wednesday afternoon series on my YouTube channel, Stacey Loves Real Estate, for those recordings. And of course, I'm always here to answer your questions. And the guest speakers always welcome you to reach out to them directly. All right, so Landlording 101. So number 1, you're entering a business relationship. You have a contract with that tenant, and they are renting a space from you. And possession is 9/10 of the law. So you want to make sure that you screen that tenant very well. So screening the tenant and providing a good housing condition for them is going to set the stage for your relationship with them. So on the one hand, you want to make sure you've checked their credit score, their criminal history, their housing history, their employment history. I like to get current and past employers and landlords. And sometimes, if let's say you don't get the current landlord, I'd rather get the prior landlord, because they're the ones that have no vested interest in saying something positive. So you might get more of the true story from the prior landlord. You also want to make sure that, just as a rule of thumb, that the tenant, if the rent is $1,000, that they make at least $3,000 a month in gross income. And trust your gut, because how they treat you when you schedule to show the property and you go back and forth with your communication, how they treat you is a big indicator of how they will be as your tenant. So trust your gut. It used to be that that's all people went on was gut. And when I started investing, my realtor just went on gut. And I was like, wow, that's way too emotional for me. I definitely wanted some of the data to back up my gut. But I definitely, notice anything that you're feeling and sensing in that interaction. If something's not lining up, ask questions. And also, on people's credit, typically we didn't look at medical issues on their credit, because that tends to be a big issue for people in, causing financial distress. But if there's like a late credit card, or I'm forgetting the term for it, but something's, in a judgment or in collections, those are things that you might want to ask about, and just ask, hey, what happened here? What happened here? And, they might give you a story that actually makes sense. And you're like, okay, you're on a different path now. But if they get defensive in explaining it, or their story just doesn't make sense, just trust your instincts. And then, so conversely, while you're thoroughly vetting them, you want to thoroughly vet your property. So when I've renovated a property or done work to a property or prepared a property, the nicer I can make it for them, the better they will treat it, especially if I'm showing them respect and, explaining to them how I want to have a good relationship with them, and that I look at, I'm providing a housing situation for them. They're paying me for that, and it's a two-way street. You also want people to have some level of personal responsibility for, like, light bulbs. You provide all the light bulbs are working, all the batteries are working, all the filter is clean in the heater. Make them responsible for that throughout the year, because you don't want them calling you for every little thing. But do encourage them, hey, if there's a water leak, let me know. I need to know about that. And it can't hurt, if you're managing your property yourself and it rains one day, just call the next day, hey, anything surface with a leak or anything like that? How's everything going? Good? Okay, great. And as much as I was a proactive or fair landlord, when I hired JG Real Estate to manage my properties, I realized that they're actually taking better care of my properties than I can for myself. And I'll talk about that when I get to their slide. So here are just some top tips to protect your asset. If it's your first property that you're leasing out, make sure you have a professional. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's my first one, I want to do it myself. It's so easy to do by myself. I don't have that many. Well, guess what? You've never done it before, and that is a legal contract, and that's what's going to protect your asset. So I would say, for the first one, especially, have a professional prepare that lease for you. And that way you can always, use them again and again because you like their service, or you can, copy that lease in the future and at least get the terms right. Obviously, using a property management for the day-to-day maintenance of the property, I think is a great thing to be doing. I think it's a huge testimonial to the services that JG does in managing my properties, that I'm a realtor and I hire a property manager and they rent my properties. So I've even considered moving into a rental and having them manage me sometimes, but that's kind of a joke, but sometimes. But yeah, so this is for my retirement. I want it taken care of well. I would never dream to manage a 401k or my stocks or anything like that. So you want to elevate your thinking in terms of, yeah, it's an extra expense, but it's there to save you money in the long term. And then always collect first, last, and security, and put that security deposit in a separate account. That's the law for each tenant. Require renter's insurance. I believe I use I'd have to look it up, but $100,000 or $300,000 for liability, because if somebody falls on the property, that's going to be the biggest expense. And if they try to come after you, you want your tenant to have that first layer of protection, and then you want to make sure that your insurance is up to snuff, and get an umbrella policy if you have more than one property. So that way you can max out your liability at $1 million. The property, damage for renters insurance, or for the value of their property, 10, 20, 30,000, it's small. And that renter policy is pretty cheap. So of course, call Chris Coyne. You can find out a general range for that and recommend and require, rather, have all your tenants get that. And name yourself as an additional insured in their policy. That's free for them, and it just puts you as an additional insured. Get an umbrella policy and keep the water bill in your name. So in Philadelphia, the water bill is lienable against the property, meaning that, if they go down to the water department, put it in their name because they showed a lease. I don't even know if that's still possible anymore, probably is. And they stop paying it and they rack up $10,000 of water. Well, guess what? When you go to sell that property or refinance it, somebody's going to tell you, you got to pay this back, or it's going to count against you if you're refinancing. So, you got to just keep that water bill in your name and bill them and have them reimburse you for the water bill. I used to do it where it was just a flat fee per month. And I figured if they went over a little bit, under a little bit, that was fine. That made it more simple for me. And just as a reminder, raise your hand in the system if you have a question as we go. Some bonus tips is you get what you pay for. There's an adage out there, you buy cheap, you buy twice. I like to say you buy cheap, you buy thrice. Because if, let's say, a cleaning product, for example, was $1 and you really should have bought the $2 product. Well, guess what? The next time you go out and buy that cleaning product, you're going to buy the $2 product to replace that $1 product. So that's $3. So you get what you pay for. Also, don't rent to family members if you want to get paid. And obviously, your family members should have the intention to make sure you're getting paid. But what I have heard time and time again is that sometimes family will take advantage of family they're renting from if they fall in hard times, and they will take advantage of their goodwill, good nature. And then the person who owns the property is left paying for that person's mortgage. And that was never the intention. So if you expect to get paid, don't rent to family. If you're okay with them living there and you paying for that property, then fine. But it is, I think some people do it because they feel like, oh, family will take care of my property better. That is not my experience. Personally, I don't have experience renting to family, but that is not what I hear. And when I hear of horror stories, sometimes it includes family. So that's just my philosophy. It's better to keep the relationship than, get paid. And then lastly, people sometimes hear about sheriff sales to buy properties, or what if I do Section 8 housing or student housing because I hear I could get more money for it. Well, those are what I consider specialty housing. So, that I am not well-versed in Section 8. I've never needed to do Section 8 to get great tenants or to get paid. And student housing, it's, you could buy something near a local university and rent out to, 6 new students, which technically is not allowed if more than 3 of them are unrelated. They can't live in one space according to the city of Philadelphia. So you could rent out to, let's say, 6 Temple students, and now they all have 6 co-signers, and this is their first time living on their own. So now you have 12 people responsible for this lease. I would rather, instead of getting a 6-bedroom home and banking a ton of money, I'd rather just get a typical 3-bedroom home, 3 single adults, or maybe a couple or some other configuration, one that's legal, and then just get a normal rent. Because what you don't pay for in money, you will pay for in time and aggravation, or both. And then lastly, excuse me, I have a hair on my face. Lastly, I wanted to kind of share my experience. I was looking back at my records and realized I've been with JG since 2015. I was extremely busy with work, and I realized even though I'm in the business day to day of real estate, I just didn't have the time to handle the showings necessary to get my units rented fast, and I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with the repairs of a growing portfolio. So that's when I got connected to JG, and I gave them a bunch of properties to manage, and I have never looked back. And at first, though, we were transitioning, I think, as an industry to showing time, and I wasn't getting notices of showing, so it made me really nervous. So I was like, please send me notices of showing so I know the properties are being shown. Because if I know if I'm going to have a vacancy, that's going to make me nervous. So I would routinely after that get notices of showings. And then over the years, with my experience with them, where I don't think I've ever had a vacancy. Sometimes maybe we have a week where I have to do turnover prep, but never have had a month-long vacancy because we couldn't find a replacement tenant. And this year I asked them, please don't send me notifications that I have, a showing, because all it does now is remind me that I could have a vacancy. But because you've done such a good job for me over the past 4 years and are so proactive in such a variety of ways, and you've always gotten me a tenant, I don't want to know day to day. You can just take care of it, and I trust you. And of course, you need to always have oversight, but that's where the communication, the trust was built over the years, and the communication is there. I say they take better care of my properties than I could on my own, because every year I'm getting these annual notices like, hey, we're running a special on cleaning your heater, or we did this annual inspection because the tenant stayed an extra year. Every turnover, I get a report that says, all right, we recommend this, this, and this. This looks like tenant damage. This looks like regular wear and tear. They get me quotes. They have, a vetting process, for their tenants, but also their contractors. And because they're working with economies of scale and they're doing this 100% of their waking hours, they're going to just be way more efficient than I am and way faster, and then holding the contractors more accountable. They're also going to make sure that, there's a bunch of licenses that you need to get when you're a landlord in Philly. So they're going to make sure that you know what to do first, second, and then they'll help you with the renewals and some of the other ones. And Jared will be talking about that. So far, so good, I hope. That's all I wanted to share for now. Before I turn it over to Jared, I just want to see if there's anybody that had any questions that I could answer about your specific situation, or a question for clarification about anything I said. All right, moving right along. Jared, it's all you.
All right, jumping in. So we'll start with a little bit about JG Real Estate, just a company background, so you kind of know who I am, who we are as a company. So JG Real Estate was founded in 2011. We started as a very small shop managing a handful of properties. I came over from KW, actually, which is where Stacy currently is, to open up my own shop. I took my then assistant and started my company. So it was me and my assistant back in 2011. Started very small in a 500 square foot office. Right now, we're around a 50-person company. We manage right around 1,400 units at the moment, and we're growing quickly. We're adding something like 50, 60 units under management every month. And as we continue to add those units, we're kind of refining our processes and our systems, and figuring out the best way to serve our clients.
Sure. Before you go on, I want to ask you, what, obviously it's a big shift to jump and open your own brokerage and go into property management to the degree that you've expanded so fast. What was that driving passion? What was that frustration in the marketplace that you saw, that gap that you wanted to fill? And how did
Well,
you do that with JG?
sure. So the first driving factor behind doing it is probably stupidity. I didn't realize how hard it would be when I did in 2011, but I was also 23 years old or something, or whatever old I was. So once I got past the stupidity portion of it, I realized that there was just a real need for quality property management. At that time, there were very few property management companies operating within the city, and of those very few property managers, only a very small handful were even doing remotely a good job. Some of them were just straight crooks. I don't remember if you remember the guy on South Street that absconded with people's security deposits. They were not just doing a bad job. Some were actual criminals. So I figured it was a pretty low bar to set, and we could do a very good job and set ourselves apart from the competition. And at the time, I was just getting into acquisitions myself, buying properties, and I thought I had a little bit of a different insight into, kind of what a landlord would want out of a property manager, and what the other options out there were.
Yeah, thank you.
So on the leasing side, basically what we're doing is handling tenant qualification, we're drafting leases, we're seeing through the entire process. So we're marketing the property with professional photography. We're structuring leases so that when renewal cycles come around, you're not left with vacancies. So Stacy touched on it a little bit before, being proactive and organizing the renewal cycle, and making sure you have enough notice to actually fill vacancies so you're not left with 30, 50, 90 days of downtime between tenants, because that's what kills your revenue stream. So we get 90 days notice of non-renewals. We pull 3 months at any given time to fill a vacancy. And what that usually means, 99% of the time anyway, that we have a structured vacancy. So we have between 3 and 7 days vacant, depending on what level of turnover work is needed. So leasing is certainly a strong suit of ours. We do a lot of it. We probably lease something like 1,000 units a year, because we have our property management business, but then we also have our leasing only business. Some landlords hire us just to lease. Some landlords are hiring us for the full package, property management and leasing. On the property management side, again, Stacey touched on it a little bit before, but we are the point of contact for the tenants. So tenants are going to lose your phone number. They're never going to call you again. If they do, you'll direct them not to. I say that somewhat facetiously. Of course, they're not going to really lose your contact information, but the goal is that if you're transitioning from self-management to professional management, that the professional manager are doing a good enough job that the tenants don't feel the need to call you. And then future tenants, of course, they're not going to have your contact information at all. We're going to be the point of contact. We're going to execute the lease. You're going to execute the lease that we send over after you approve them, but they're not going to be reaching out to you directly. We'll have an approval threshold in our contract. So, of course, if there's an issue, which is above that approval threshold, we will reach out to you, get approval, and then move forward with whatever that repair is. So you have a nice buffer, basically, between the tenant and you as the landlord, so that you can do whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's focus on your job or your family or retire, and you don't have to worry about the day-to-day. I think that's good. All right. And we just talked about this a little bit, but that level of separation between the tenant and you, of course, it lets you live the life you want to lead. No one wants to be called about 3 a.m. leaky toilets, but beyond that, it also lets you make smarter decisions. So very often, a landlord and a tenant will be in a conversation, a near dispute, let's say. A tenant wants one thing, a landlord wants one thing, and often the landlord just gives in and they say, you know what, I don't feel like having this conversation anymore. I'll make the $500 repair that I don't really even think is necessary because I just want the tenant to go away and stop calling me. Well, if you have the buffer between you, you can tell your property manager, no, I'm not making the repair. And that property manager will have to then deal with that difficult conversation. And that's what the property manager is being paid for. So if you have one of those come up, and let's say it's $1,000 repair, and let's say, the management fee for that unit was $100 a month, So your total yearly cost was 1,200. Maybe you just saved 1,000. Maybe you just paid $200 for the year of property management just as a result of making a smarter decision. That's not the case all the time, and often landlords are fully willing to, have that tough conversation. But if you're not, that's another way to look at it. It allows you to become more passive than active. So, active investments are where you're in that investment on the day to day. You're handling the logistics, you're handling the operation, you're handling calls. That's not what you want as an investor that's looking to diversify. Let's say you have money in stocks, you have money in real estate, you have money in, various other investment streams. Your goal, or most investors' goal, is to do less work, not more work, so you can focus on what really makes you money, or just invest more and look for more opportunities. So becoming more passive is a big piece of why property management is valuable, and why when you examine the cost, you can really dive a little deeper into that and look at the opportunity cost of what it allows you to do with your time. Economies of scale, you're really able to leverage the systems that we've built. So we have vendor relationships, we have systems and processes in place, which you get to leverage by hiring us. So very often, if you call a plumber and you need to get a water heater replacement done, they've never heard from you, you have no relationship with them. They're probably going to quote you $1,300-1,400 just because they'd like to make some more money, and they don't have a relationship with you. Our standard rate right now at this time for getting a 50-gallon gas water heater replaced is $850, and that's because we replace 10 water heaters a month with a variety of vendors, and we know what good pricing is, we know what bad pricing is, and we know how to go to bat for our clients. Again, when you're evaluating that overall cost of the service, you got to look at all these things, and sometimes I don't even do a great job of articulating all these advantages to clients when they're asking about the service, but they're important components of it. The systems and processes we have in place, allow us to do more preventative maintenance. So, for example, every time a tenant moves in, if it's a forced air system, we'll drop off 4 filters, and we'll say you got to change these quarterly. If filters don't get replaced and systems get more taxed, and they start to break down just because you didn't drop $4 filters off, that's a hidden cost that's tough to identify without having kind of been through that cycle of an air handler breaking down because there wasn't a filter in it. All right, let's go. We can go to the next one.
Sure.
Stacey's controlling the slides.
I have the control. Okay.
So just a little kind of org structure of the team. So give an understanding of the structure. So the leasing team is comprised of our admin staff at the front desk. So they're fielding calls from prospective tenants. They're scheduling those tenants to see properties on the agent schedule. So we have 2 admins. And then we have our leasing agents who are physically showing the properties. They're being scheduled by the admin staff. So they're showing the prospects, they're guiding them through the application process, and then they're writing the leases. So they're kind of handling the full life cycle of that tenant. Once that lease is executed, if we're managing the property, they're then kind of turning that over to our property managers to handle the maintenance component of things and getting the turnover done. The coordinators are stationed at their desk 90% of the time, so that there's always someone from the leasing team available to take calls from landlords, from tenants, from anyone. We don't ever like an entire team to be out in the field because it means there's a coverage gap, and it means that there's not someone there to handle people's questions, whether it's a walk-in, whether it's a tenant phone call, or whether it's a live chat on the website, whatever it is. We want people there able to answer questions. So the coordinators are there fielding that stuff. They're also doing some showings. They're also writing some leases, and they're licensed as well. So all agents and our coordinators are licensed agents. And then our admin staff, actually one of our admin staff is licensed as well. On the property management side, we also have property managers and we have a coordinator. So the property managers are guys that are kind of splitting their time, like 50% office work, 50% field work. That field work is comprised of going out and looking at issues that might have been reported by tenants. So sometimes a tenant will report a minor kind of handyman level issue, and our property managers are all guys that have a handyman level skill set. So sometimes we'll go out and they'll replace a lock set, they'll replace a smoke detector. They'll kind of do something minor that takes them 20, 30 minutes in an effort to save the client money rather than hiring a third party vendor to go out and make that 30-minute repair. And that vendor is going to charge $200 because that's just what vendors do. They need to make money also. So those property managers are making minor repairs, and then they're also going out and trying to figure out and diagnose more in-depth repairs where they might not be the guy actually making that fix, but they've got to figure out who the right guy is. They need to go out and figure out, sometimes tenant maintenance requests or portal submissions are kind of ambiguous, and you don't really know what they're saying, or they're not giving a whole lot of detail. So the property managers have to go out and figure out if there's a blocked condensate line, or a trap is blocked, or if a breaker was popped, or there's a more serious electrical issue. So they've got to go out and kind of triage and then figure out who the right vendor is, because you don't want to go through 4 different vendors and paying service charges every time because we didn't figure out who the right guy was the first time. So that's kind of their role. And then coordinator on the property management team, similar to the coordinator on the leasing team, in that he is kind of fielding all of those phone calls. So there's always someone stationed, ready to assist a landlord or a tenant. He's scheduling annual inspections for the property managers. He's kind of running the property manager's schedule. Then we have our accounts team. Accounts team does a lot of the accounting work. So they are posting charges to tenant ledgers. They are making ACH disbursements, so they're paying owners. 99% of our disbursements, the way we pay owners is by ACH, so it's all electronic. They're answering owner questions about owner statements. So if an owner reviews their monthly owner packet and they see a charge that they'd like some more detail on, let's say there was a $200 charge to a plumber, and they're like, what's going on here? We're not sure what this charge is exactly. They should be aware because we also post the actual bill from the vendor to the portal. So full transparency, you can see everything that we're doing. But if they had additional detail, they would ask the accounts team. Accounts team would then either answer the question, or they would kind of go back and speak with the property manager who actually handled that repair and get the additional detail, and then get back to the client. So that's kind of an overview of the different teams at the company that clients interact with.
Question, Jared. What is the farthest property away from your office that you have rented out or you manage?
So probably the far northwest of the city, Chestnut Hill. We also manage a handful of properties in Ballard-Kinwood, so Montgomery County. Our primary focus really is Philly, though. And the farthest property we have is definitely Chestnut Hill, I would say.
Okay. And obviously you manage for people who have one property, right? Single family
Yep.
properties, multifamilies, and
Yep.
you have a big building that you're renting out. If you want to give a small plug for it, the Civic.
Oh yeah, so we have the Civic at 1600 West Girard. So it's a former hospital, which is in the process of being converted to apartments, plus about 30,000 square feet of retail space. Very cool building, fully amenitized. So 24/7 doorman. It's got a golf simulator. It has a yoga room. It has an awesome fitness center that I actually have the privilege of designing myself, so that I can work out there.
Dog washing station.
Dog washing station, exactly. And then in that 30,000 square foot of retail, there's some pretty cool retail tenants that are coming in as well, which will kind of make it a very cool community. And also an awesome roof deck with nice city views. So we have 88 units there. So we have micro units, we have larger studios, we have 1 bedrooms, and we have 2 bedrooms. And yeah, thank you for giving the opportunity for the Civic plug. But that is the largest building that we have right now. It's a little bit of a different animal right now, because we're kind of learning the ropes about how to activate a fully amenitized building with a dedicated staff of, it'll probably be 4 people. Actually, more than that, between multiple concierges, it's probably going to be more like 6 or 7 people. So yeah, we're learning, but that is the spectrum: single unit up to 88 unit buildings.
Yeah. Or 89, why not break the record?
Yeah, exactly.
What if you I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but I know one of your 2 bedrooms was going for like 2,800.
Yep,
And do you remember the square footage?
something like that. I'm not going to give an exact number, but my assumption is it's hovering around like 1,200 square feet.
That's what I was thinking. So this building, so I love this building because Partners is, I don't know how much they've invested in Brewery Town over the years, but I first met, was it Aaron is one of the owners?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I met him a decade or a decade and a half ago, probably actually closer to 15 or more years ago. And they've just been pouring money into that area. They've moved a little farther east for this project. But I also have some multi-unit new construction buildings where the gross income is going to be in the 8,500 range and the asking is 1.45 million. And we sold one last year by the same builder for 1.295. So if you know of anybody out there who's watching this now or later, Partners and the Civic, and through the help of Jared, they're really pushing the envelope as far as the rental amounts are going in that area. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, certainly setting the bar for kind of a different type of building for that area, and higher rents, and higher rents that are justified by the amenities being offered. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
2 blocks from the subway.
Yep.
Yeah. All right,
Cool.
here's your next slide.
Dive into licenses, regulations, and utility forms. So obviously the city of Philadelphia is a little bit of a different animal. So for people that own properties in various cities, you'll notice that Philly has kind of some onerous requirements, which I'll run over. So the first is the commercial activity license. That's required for anyone operating any business in the city. Doesn't matter whether you're a landlord, you own an ice cream shop, whatever it is, you're supposed to have a commercial activity license. Formerly called the business privilege license, and it used to cost $300, I believe. And I think they switched that and made it free and then renamed it something like 5 years ago. So now it's a commercial activity license. It's actually pretty easy to obtain it through Eclipse. It's the city's online system for licensing. To create an Eclipse account, you register a Philadelphia tax identification number, tax account number, different from your EIN number, which is federal. So you get that, then you can get your commercial activity license. The website's a little buggy, but usually you try 3-4 times, then it works. Housing license, so it used to be called the housing inspection license. Again, the city, in its infinite wisdom, decided to rename it the rental license. So now it's called the rental license. It used to be $50 a year. Now it's $55 a year. It's per unit. So if you own, a 10-unit building, it's $55 for each of the 10 units. They do have some exceptions. If you have like an owner-occupied duplex, I believe you don't pay, or you only pay for the 1 unit, not the occupied unit. So there are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, it's $55 per unit. The rental suitability certificate, so that is free. The prerequisite, and I should also say the rental license, the prerequisite to that is having the commercial activity license. You'll notice a pattern here that there's, prerequisites for each license, and they're usually building on each other. So prerequisite to get the rental suitability is having your rental license. And that is required every time you rent a unit to a new tenant. You have to go to the Philly, it is a portal on the philly.gov, which allows you to basically certify that you have no code violations, that the properties are safe, that if you were supposed to get a lead dust certification, that you've done that, basically that you're in compliance with all of the city's laws. So you prior to executing the lease, you're supposed to go get this rental suitability certificate, and then you're supposed to deliver it with the lease to the tenant for them to sign off on having received it, along with the Partners for Good Housing pamphlet from the city. Next, we'll go over the Philadelphia Lead Disclosure and Certification Law. So this came into play in late 2012. Got a lot of pushback from landlords in the city, and for good reason. It is something that has the best of intentions. Of course, who doesn't want to protect small children from ingesting lead? As the father of two small children, I would never want either one of them to ingest, lead and be hurt. But it is another onerous requirement. And, basically, if it's a property that's built before 1978 and there's going to be a child 6 years or under, you have to go and get a lead dust certificate. So basically what that is it's an inspector who's licensed with the EPA and the city, who goes in, they note if there's any loose paint, chipping paint, which appears to be lead based, if there's any very obvious just visibly, but then they're also doing dust sampling, which has to be sent off to the lab, and then the lab turns the results around, they give it to the inspector, and then the inspector, writes up a report saying whether you passed or not. Then you have to take that certificate, which they produce, and then deliver it to the tenant. The tenant signs off on it. I have not ordered one of these personally in some time, but last I remember, I think the company we use is kind of charging on a per bedroom basis. So if you have a studio, it's far less expensive than if you have a 5-bedroom house. I think they need to take a sample from each room. And I think it's something in the neighborhood of $150 a room or something. Don't quote me on that. That's a guess. But
I just had a
because you've done one recently.
Yeah, I had a client that had to do it for a triplex for his sale. I forget why, but it was actually a lot less painful than I thought it would be, and it didn't cost as much. It was pretty fast. I'll look for the receipt while you're finishing up your.
And that probably was for a different reason. It was related to the sale, but yeah, probably did the same test regardless.
Yeah.
Landlord cooperation program. So prerequisite to getting signed up for PGW's LCP is that you have a rental license. So you have to enter that rental license to verify it's active. Then you can sign up for the landlord cooperation program. Basically, you are saying when you sign up for the cooperation program that you will cooperate with PGW, and that if a tenant stops paying their gas bill or goes delinquent for some reason, that you as the landlord will cooperate with PGW to get into the property and turn their gas off or whatever needs to be done. The benefit to the landlord is then PGW is saying in exchange for your cooperation, we won't lien you. We won't place a lien on the property for that delinquent balance if you're cooperating and helping us deal with the tenant. PICO and PGW auto revert agreements. So these are agreements that we facilitate as the property manager. So basically these agreements place service for electric PICO and gas PGW into the landlord's name in times of vacancy. So one tenant is in possession of the property, they move out on the 31st of the month, the next tenant is not moving in until the 7th of the month, you have a 7-8 day gap there. You still need working utilities because you need to do turnover work. If it's winter, you need to make sure that the property is being heated and the pipes aren't freezing. You need to ensure that there's continuity of utility service. So we will get these auto revert agreements filled out for you. You sign them, and then we ship them off to PICO and PGW so that you're protected.
All right. So now I remember why we had to do it. It was because there was a child in one of the units and we were getting, this is exactly the reason why you need a professional to help you. So I was helping sell a triplex where the landlord had their own agreements. Oh, I realized, where the landlord had their own weird ass lease, excuse my language, and it made it that much harder for me and my realtor, the buyer's agent, to inform, what the lease terms were, because we're not attorneys. And then, now the buyer has to get an attorney if they really want to understand how this lease works or doesn't work. And they weren't kept up, so they weren't quite in date. So they technically didn't, they technically expired at the end of the last lease. And it was a mess. So when you use a professional and they're using the standard forms, there's protocols and processes, and we're used to looking at certain things in a certain way and saying, that number looks a little too low and this is what this means. So it's so important, to get it done right, because if you go to sell the building with the tenants, the leases are going to be in effect and the sale will be affected by, the quality of the leases that you have in place. But I believe the price was right around 150, and it was for that one bedroom unit. So I'll turn it back.
All right. So my pricing was not wildly off. That's about right. Okay. All right. So now just some self-management tips. You may choose to hire a property manager. You may not. If you are self-managing, just a few tips. The first thing is related to pets, kind of a double-edged sword. You're exposing yourself to a way larger pool of potential renters, and then making it that much more likely that you convert that pool of prospects to actual renters if you're allowing pets. Now, that being said, you want to make sure that if you're going to allow pets, that you're going to do it in a responsible way and they're not going to damage the property and you're protected. So there's a few ways to do that. You can collect a refundable deposit. You can charge a fee. You can charge monthly pet rent. My preference on my properties is pet rent. So usually I'll charge something like $25 a month as pet rent for a dog, and maybe something, around the $15, $20 a month range for a cat. The reason I prefer that is if you collect a refundable deposit, that is just additional security deposit, and you need to refund that if they enter into a second year of the lease. So effectively, you've given away your protection as far as that pet goes, because in the city, you're not allowed to hold more than 2 months, you're not allowed to hold over 1 month's rent of security going to the second year of the lease, and that pet deposit would constitute more than 1 month. Going into that, I should probably touch on the fact that the city has also recently interpreted last month's rent, even though it's a prepaid rent, as security deposit as well. So now we're actually, when tenants go to the second year of the lease, we're only holding 1 month. So we're actually holding the security deposit and then applying last month's rent to the actual last month of their first year. So another little gift from the city of Philadelphia to landlords, not being able to retain the last month's rent if the tenant renews. Something to note as far as pets go and approval and denials is that sometimes a pet is not a pet. So when I say a pet is not a pet, if it's an ESA, if it's an emotional support animal, the Fair Housing Act does not look at that pet as a pet. It is an emotional support animal. And emotional support animals are not necessarily dogs. My understanding is that you can have an emotional support iguana if you want. And you just need to be very careful about approval and denial decisions and not violating the Fair Housing Act. The ESAs require a letter from a physician. Sometimes those letters are fraudulent. They're not always real. Sometimes they are. You just need to do some due diligence and figure it out before you kind of go off the cuff with a denial that could hurt you. Larger, a lot of people have kind of misconceptions about larger dogs. So a Mastiff that's 115 pounds, well, it has to do way more damage than, a 15-pound Chihuahua, right? Well, not always. So that large dog very often might be the laziest thing in the world, and might sit in the corner all day and not move. So it's not going to do a lot of damage. The only way you're really going to know is what Stacy alluded to a little bit earlier, is getting in touch with that prior landlord or two landlords back and finding out how that pet treated the property. That's really the best way of knowing. Next, again, as Stacy touched on a little bit earlier, the city does not allow more than 3 unrelated parties to live in the household. So again, city, infinite wisdom, is thinking that if you have more than 3 unrelated parties, you're now running a rooming house. And you can run a rooming house, you just have to have the proper zoning for that. So if you're in an RSA 5 single family property, technically you can't have 4 unrelated roommates. I'll share a little story about this. I have a property at York and Aramingo with 4 bedrooms, which I rented to 4 individuals. 2 of the individuals were brothers. So it was my opinion that I was in compliance because 2 were related, 2 were unrelated. So I didn't have more than 3 unrelated parties. The neighbor got angry for some reason. Maybe the kids were being too loud one night. I don't know exactly what the story is. Neighbor got angry, called L&I. L&I came out and they actually cited me and told me that the tenants had to move out. I actually fought it. I hired an attorney, fought it with the city, and we got the city to drop it. But it just shows that the city is fully willing to enforce this, and they're even willing to enforce it improperly. So it's something you want to be wary of if you're buying a property at Temple or Drexel, somewhere where you're very likely to get more than 3 unrelated parties, because the city will, cite you for that and force the tenants to move out. Last thing, just structuring leases properly. So a lot of people will structure leases only requiring maybe 30 days notice of non-renewal. 30 days doesn't give you enough time to fill a vacancy once you get notice of non-renewal. We require 90 days. Auto renewal terms. Really important that you have tenants automatically renewed. So if they fail to give adequate notice, the lease doesn't just automatically terminate, it automatically renews for another year with an increase. So what that does is it really puts the onus on the tenant to communicate with you rather than putting the onus on you to communicate with them and figure out what's going on, because you can always hold them to that auto renewal and say, you never got in touch with me, you're locked into another year at a 5% increase. So that wraps it up for my little self-management tips.
Yeah, so I want to just add on to what you said about that. The structure is so that it's a 5% automatic renewal. In the past, I had just made sure in my calendar that I had 90 days to give them notice or let them know what I was going to do the following year with their lease. And then they have 30 days to get back to me. So that way I had a full 60 days to rent out the place if they were going to move. What I like about the automatic renewal at the 5% is that I'm often willing to do 3%, 4%, whatever. So it's kind of, when they sign it, they don't really think about what 5% means. But when they like the property and they get to it, if they have an issue with it, they oftentimes will ask, hey, can we do it at a lesser rate? And if they've been a good tenant and I want them to stay, I'm more than likely to, negotiate that with them, rather than making it like 3% to start and then they get you down to 1%. Because my taxes, I don't know about yours, but mine have gone up a lot over the past couple years. So my expenses are increasing. And at the same time, I want, I'd rather not have tenant turnover. But I also want to make sure I'm keeping up with market rates, because if you let it go too long, you'll have an under rented property. And then if you go to sell it, for example, you're not going to get as much value out of the property because you either have to raise the rents on the tenant or take a lesser price, because the next person's not going to be able to make any money on the property as an investment for them. So any questions about the content that Jared shared, which was phenomenal. And of course, I love JG Real Estate. We haven't partnered before in terms of doing an event, but I thought this was perfect because they do such a good job for me, and I send all my clients to him anyway. So I figured let's get him recorded in a webinar, get all his great tips. Any questions before we just move on to some housekeeping stuff and wrapping up? All right, I'll look on the side. Obviously, you can reach Jared at jg-realestate.com. There's his phone number, or jg-realestate.com. You can find him on the website. I did upload, there are 4 handouts now. So in addition to Jared's flyer and information, I also uploaded, it was Aladdin paint testing service that did the lead-based paint test. Let's see what else. All right, so host for hospitals, I'm pretty passionate about this because a lot of times we want to give back to the communities that we're in. Maybe we don't have the money to do it, or we have certain charities we like to give the money to, but we feel like we could do more. And if you have a spare bedroom and you are willing to host somebody who is visiting an area hospital, whether they're getting treatment or their family is getting treatment, it's just a great way to really welcome people that are going through a hard time and are using the great resources that are our hospitals and our medical treatment centers in the area. So if you or anybody else is interested, it's a really easy process. The coordinator would just meet with you at your house to make sure the house is appropriate for the program and that the program is appropriate for you. They consider you their client, so they always want to make sure that you're happy, because without hosts, they don't have a service to offer to families that are visiting. And then once both of you approve of each other, then you'll go on their email alert list, and when there's a need, you can say, I can fill that need, or if you can't, you can't. So sometimes a host might host like twice a year, 4 times a year. You could do more than that if you wanted to, but it's really a commitment. It's not really a commitment, it's only when you can do it. And I've done it. I live in a 1-bedroom now, so I can't do it right now, but it is really rewarding. So I would encourage you to check it out, hostforhospitals.org. And then, of course, in 2 weeks, we will have on August 6th and August 7th, the analyzing an area and a property for rental or flip. So we'll be looking at what I call a simple cap rate. And then we'll also be looking at ARV, after renovated value analysis. And we'll be having an attorney on that night. So this week we had Jared, obviously, and then on that one we'll have a real estate attorney. So we'll be talking about some law topics. And then, of course, if you scroll through, download and scroll through, you'll see all the contact information for our guest speakers and presenters, including me. And then lastly, these are the 3 major Keller books that I recommend for investments. So The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, so it's basically a blueprint for investing. Hold, which is all about when you buy a property and hold it, keep it, rent it out. And then the best practices for flip, when you buy a property and then you sell it, which are next in 2 weeks, the topic in 2 weeks. So I will end it here. Any questions from our wonderful audience? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to the 3rd of 5 series, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Thanks, Jared.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.